So my friends reached out to me with an idea, and they sent me this sketch, which I really loved. I think it really captures the whole thing, and it's really charming. So the idea is that they do puppet shows, and they wanted a background that would move. And so the idea is that there would be two wheels, and there would be a conveyor belt in between them that would rotate, creating the illusion of the scenery going by. So we met to refine the details, and this is the sketch that we ended up with. This is in inches, and so we ended up with a total length of 36 inches, so about 3 feet. And the diameter of these wheels would be 10 inches, with some space underneath to allow for all the scenery to go by of about 6 inches. And then I sketched out some ideas for how the crank would operate. I thought it would be interesting to have a belt moving these things, so you'll see that later in the video. But my first step was to make the wheels. To get the geometry for the wheels, I used this polygon box Cuttle template. It's meant for making small boxes that have a few sides, but I kind of misused it in a way to make the wheels that I needed. So I started by changing the number of sides to 24, so that kind of approximates a circle. Then of course I changed the diameter to 10.25 inches and the total height of the box to 4.8 inches, which allows me to accommodate those 2 inches for the Velcro belt. And of course the material thickness for the 1/4 inch plywood that I was using. And then I added some holes in the middle. This is what it looks like. So you can see the center hole for my axle, and then a few holes to attach some things onto those big wheels. So after this, it was off to the laser cutter. This is some 6mm, about a 1/4 inch birch plywood, but the green stuff you see here is just the masking tape. These are the parts for one of the wheels, 2 faces, and then all the slats for the perimeter. My first job was to remove all of the masking tape. Laser cutting can leave some scorch marks and burnt edges, and the role of the masking tape is to help you end up with cleaner parts. So these holes are to use these bearing blocks, and I want to mount them using this tiny number 6 screw. But then I want more of the screw to bite into it, so that's what these little reinforcers are for. So I'm gonna glue the reinforcer here, so I have twice the thickness for the screw to bite on. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of wood glue here to hold it in place. So I should clamp it and align it. Now I want to place all the slats around the perimeter, but I'm going to apply some wood glue as I go. After all the slats, it was time to glue the second face, and I had to add glue to all the little sections a little bit faster this time, so I could join it in a single step. These are all the sections that are going to be in contact at the end, and the inside faces as well, and the outside faces. This part was a little bit tricky. Some sections clicked in, but then to finish it off, I had to wiggle the rest of the slats with a screw to make them fit. And of course, some final convincing with the mallet. I put some weight on to let the glue cure. Now the bearing blocks could go in, attached with those number 6 wood screws. And the axles were 8mm rods I got from a discarded printer. And this was my first time spinning it. It felt pretty good. For such a big wheel, it felt sturdy but lightweight. I had to add a few spacers to my driving wheel to accommodate the pulley assembly. As you can see here, it's a sort of sandwich of round pieces with one of the small ones in the middle. And I went with longer screws to grab onto all the different layers. So my idea with these is to make a pulley right here, and I'm gonna use this polyurethane belt. It fits nicely in between the two sheets of the 6mm plywood. But before that, I need to build a way to hold the wheels in place. I designed these templates and I cut them out of chipboard with the laser cutter so I could trace them onto my 1/2-inch birch plywood. The templates also included all the mounting and assembly holes, and so here I'm marking them so I can drill them later. But before that, it's off to the bandsaw to cut all the big pieces. For the fork section that holds the axle, I had to pre-drill a hole and then finish it on the bandsaw. The bandsaw gives you a really good rough cut, but you often find the precision all the way to the line by using a combination of different sanders. And here I'm just pre-drilling the mounting holes for the bearing blocks and also for attaching this triangle to the base. This is some countersinking of those holes. And here I'm cutting the base, which is a simple rectangle, also out of 1/2-inch plywood. And here I'm setting up that rectangle, the base, so I can attach the triangular fork, and I want them to be square. I added this one wood screw first, so the other two holes would land in place. And now the second triangle can go on the other side. And this is my driving pulley, the one that's attached to the handle. And I'm using this flange to make it grip onto the axle. And the axle for the pulley is supported by these two bearing blocks that are inside of the triangular supports. Now I can place that driven wheel and wrap the polyurethane belt around so I can measure the length. This is also my first time joining this type of belt, so I improvised a jig with this clamp by holding the two ends with some zip ties. So I had an easy way to bring them back into alignment after melting the ends with the lighter. And it worked pretty well. I let it sit there for about 20 minutes, and when I came back, it was very strong. The only thing I had to do was trim the excess that squeezed out with the heat. I mounted it onto my assembly, and the action was super smooth. So now onto the handle. The crank arm for the handle was made in two pieces that got glued together and then aligned with these 4 screws that match the pattern for that silver flange. And for this kind of mechanical device that is going to be handled a lot, I like using these nylon locking nuts. Here you can see a similar locking nut that gets embedded into the crank arm, and it's the one that I'm going to use to attach the bolt that becomes the axle for the handle itself. And this part goes onto the pulley axle, and it grabs onto that axle with these set screws. And you can see it in action here. It felt surprisingly smooth. But before I can test it, I needed a base for both wheels. This one is made out of 3/4 inch plywood. I decided on the location, then I measured the distance from the edge so I could trace a line across the whole thing, so I could align both wheels. I placed a single screw that I could use as a pivot point, and then I wiggled my base in compliance with the line I traced before securing it in place. Now I could place my 4-inch wide Velcro that would be the conveyor belt between the two wheels, so I could test it. I was very excited at this point. I attached it with just another little piece of the hook part of the Velcro, and that held on pretty well. And this was my first time testing the whole contraption. It works as intended, but I made a big mistake. Let me show you. So we got the 4-inch belt right here, and it's traveling well in between the two wheels. So that's nice. And then my idea is that the pulley would lower the handle position, and then if I wanted to, I could change the size of this pulley to change the ratio in between these two. Right now it's just like a 1-to-1. But the huge mistake that I made is that the goal is to have things that are attached right here, you know, like other pieces that would travel along and then, you know, turn around and then come back. But then by having the handle down here, I put this axle right here, and that axle just interrupts things. I think what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna move this handle back to here, even though it's not as pretty, but it's the simpler solution. So I had to reconfigure a bunch of things, including the spacing between the forks and the location of these bearing blocks. But I think I got back on track. So I mounted the handle onto the top axle, and it worked really well in this configuration. And I still can't believe I didn't see the problems with that pulley. Anyway, at this point, I could finalize the length of my conveyor belt. So I marked the location where I could sew some of the hook part of the Velcro on the back, so the conveyor belt can attach to itself. And the nice thing about this is that you can detach it, but it's also a way to control how tight the conveyor belt is between the two wheels. At this point, I decided I wanted to add some handles so the whole thing would be easy to carry. So I added some holes onto those triangular pieces, and I cut them so my hand would fit inside of it. I also rounded the edges for comfort. And with all my dimensions in place, I could mark and cut the axles with a little grinding to get some nice edges. I also marked the locations of the set screws so I could grind a flat spot in that place to ensure a really good grip between the parts. And during this final assembly, a little bit of Loctite on the set screws to make sure they don't come loose over time. I decided to turn some wooden handles, and the first step was to drill a hole where that handle screw would fit. Then I trimmed the corners on the bandsaw to get closer to a round piece. And onto the baby lathe for turning. I'm not really proficient at turning wood on the lathe, but I think there's a certain charm to improvising these shapes and having the main point of contact with the machine be a handmade piece. After cutting it off, I sanded that little section on the belt sander. I finished both handles with a little oil finish to bring out the color and give them a pleasant texture. I wanted to create a little secret storage for the set screw hex wrenches. So it mounts inside of the triangle with a couple of wood screws. The hex wrenches fit inside of these cavities, and they're held in place by a couple of number 4 machine screws so they don't fall out when you're moving the machine. And I placed the Wolfcat Workshop signature stamp covering the holes where the handle used to be. I wanted to see it working, so I made a couple of trees and boulders out of foam and felt and took it for a spin. I hope my friends really like it, and I can't wait to see it in one of their shows. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you for watching.